Hello, my name is Arpine Aloyan, and I'm the library manager for the amazing West Hollywood Library. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing you to tonight's speakers. Leading our conversation is our county librarian, Skye Patrick. Skye Patrick was appointed to her role in 2016. She is responsible for the library's 86 libraries, 15 vehicle mobile fleet, and resources that are used by more than 3.4 million customers across LA County. From the beginning of her tenure, Patrick prioritized community engagement through visioning sessions, inviting the public to share their ideas for local libraries. Her mission has been to break down barriers and expand access by developing programs that meet the needs of LA County's diverse communities. Under Skye's leadership, LA County Library received the 2023 National Medal for Museum and Library Service, the nation's highest honor given to museums and libraries. She is also a recipient of the 2025 James Irvine Leadership Award, which recognizes leaders whose innovative solutions to critical state challenges improve people's lives, create opportunity, and contribute to a better California. Patrick remains dedicated to reinforcing the library's role as a hub for information, literacy, civic engagement, learning, and belonging. Tonight, Skye will be interviewing Dr. Anthony Wexler. Dr. Wexler's work focuses on the ways air pollution travels through the atmosphere to airways and affects different parts of the body. He uses experiments, crunches numbers, and takes into account theories in physics to do his research. Members of Dr. Wexler's laboratory are developing new instruments for measuring air pollution and meteorology related to air pollution transport, new mathematical techniques for modeling air pollution dynamics and thermodynamics, and new exposure paradigms for understanding the neurological and cardiopulmonary health effects of air pollution. The Air Quality Research Center operates the Improved Air Monitoring Network for the National Parks Service and performs chemical analysis for the Chemical Speciation Network for the Environmental Protection Agency.
Thank you, Arpine. Welcome, Doctor. I'll be right with you. Welcome to all of our guests. We're happy to have you here for this a couple of days after Earth Day, but I think we're going to have a great conversation. But before we get started, we have to do our land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tactaviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash people. We honor and pay respects to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to healing, reconciliation, and elevating the stories, culture, and communities of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on these ancestral lands, and we are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native people and local tribal government, including, and in no particular order, the San Bernardino Tactavian Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. Welcome, Dr. Wexler. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
How are you doing?
I am doing okay considering the world, but I think I'm going to be doing much better after this conversation because I have some feeling that you're going to inspire me to do something wonderful or something great tonight.
I'll do my best.
Thank you. So why don't we get started and you tell us a little bit about the work that you do at UC Davis's Air Quality Research Center, just to orient our audience.
Yeah, good. I'm director of the Air Quality Research Center. There's a lot of things going on at UC Davis related to air quality. We do mathematical modeling of air quality around the state to understand the relationship between emissions and the concentration of the pollutants that we breathe. We do a lot of measurements of the air pollutants around the state and around the country, both for the improved network for the National Park Service, the Chemical Speciation Network for the US EPA, and for a lot of community groups that are exposed to toxics. We do a lot of work on the health impacts of air pollution, cardiovascular health effects, pulmonary health effects, neurological health effects, and a lot of fundamental physics and chemistry about really what's going on in the atmosphere that transforms the air pollutants from when they're emitted to when we breathe them. We cover a lot here.
You're doing a lot. Yes, indeed. I'm going to try and break these questions down because I have a lot of different things I want to ask you. But scientists, you're working to actually measure, or maybe not even measure, certain aspects or attributes of the air quality. What is the air quality tab in my weather app? So I am always looking at that, and I live in LA, and it's always yellow.
Yeah.
It's rarely green. What am I looking at?
So LA is unique in the US of having what's the EPA calls extreme air pollution. So it's off the charts. We know that. The air pollution in LA has gotten a lot better over the last few decades. When I was living down there in the early 80s, late
Right.
80s, it was
Mm-hmm.
pretty brutal. And it's a lot better than it was. What you're looking at are indicators of the two pollutants that primarily affect your health. You're looking at a combination of ozone, which is primarily affecting your lungs,
Mm-hmm.
and PM2.5. PM2.5 stands for the particulate
Particle matter.
matter smaller than 2.5 micron in diameter, and that primarily affects your cardiovascular health.
I'll
So
have to say, those of us who are not air quality scientists, we got familiar with PM 2.5 during the pandemic. So having to understand and decipher which masks were actually going to be appropriate, at least in the beginning, in the early days, never had I ever thought of what PM 2.5 meant until this last probably 5 or 6 years. Okay.
yeah,
So again, it's matter larger than two,
smaller.
smaller. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the particulate mass. So in the atmosphere, you have particles and you have gases. Okay, the gases are just like the oxygen and nitrogen in the air, but there are other ones too. The particles are little solid or liquid things, okay, and they have a wide size range from really tiny few nanometers up to 10, 20 microns, which is still very small, much
Mm-hmm.
smaller than your hair, than the diameter of your hair. And so those float around in the atmosphere. They're emitted by all kinds of sources around LA, like cars and trucks driving around, and restaurants cooking, and having emissions of hamburger frying, say, or whatever.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
there's power plants, and there's refineries, manufacturing all over the place. There's things in your home, things that people cosmetics that smell nice. Well, all those things all end up in the atmosphere, and with millions of people living in LA, all those things, one way or another, affect air quality.
So I am new to LA, meaning the last decade. It's better now. That's what I heard you say.
Oh yeah,
Let's talk about the difference between the 80s, because I've heard people who have lived here for a very long time or for the majority of their lives saying, oh my God, in the 80s, you would not want to live here. And I've seen pictures, so I believe it. Let's talk about then versus now in terms of air quality.
yeah. So one way to discuss this is one of my students became a professor at USC, and he was in Culver City, and he took a picture of the Hollywood sign, and he said,
Right.
Tony, he wrote an email to me saying, Tony, we're out of business. I can see the sign.
Yay. I suppose
So
your goal is to work yourself out of business.
Right. I mean, that's the best thing for me is to be out of business, but I don't think it's going to
Good.
happen in my lifetime.
At least not in California.
And many places in the world, many places in the world.
So I
Yeah.
always get this question. I'm always curious because, I drive a car. It's not an electric car. I would like to ultimately elevate to an electric car at some point in the near future. Where in the world is worse? I have been to China and I could arguably say that that was different, but like, where do you know that the air quality is worse in Los Angeles?
Oh, many places. Many,
Well,
many
I think
places.
I should be comforted by that.
In China, there are many places that are worse than Los Angeles, but Jakarta, Bangkok. I'll be going to the Punjab region of Pakistan to work on air pollution there in a couple of weeks. The air pollution is so bad there, they basically shut the country for a few months in the wintertime.
Okay.
I was recently in Santiago, Chile. A lot of communities in Chile use wood to heat their homes. And the way with the Andes so close to the ocean in Chile, it's a very narrow country.
That's right.
Most of these communities are in valleys that confine the air, like Los Angeles does, except smaller
Right.
things in Los
Hmm.
Angeles. And so the wood smoke just stays there and everyone's breathing it, and it's
Hmm.
terrible for their health.
Well, I know here in California, I'm totally going off script because I kind of do this, doctor. I have a wood burning fireplace at my house, and I think I've been grandfathered in. So if I ever have the ability to update my house, I'll have to update it to, I guess, an electric gas fireplace. So is that part of what we're dealing with, that to minimize that those wood burning particles?
Wood burning is a source, and it's a bad one because,
Mm,
I mean, all solid fuels are pretty terrible, whether it's burning wood or burning coal. We don't burn coal in California very much, but a lot of parts of other parts of the country and many parts of the world still burn coal. Yeah, solid fuels are pretty inefficient. They burn it very inefficiently, and so there's a lot of pollutants being emitted. As you can see, if you go outside, you can look at the chimney and you see it coming out, and you can smell it, instantly. And the statistics are that the people who are most affected by the people who are burning wood in their fireplaces are the people who are burning wood in their fireplaces, because
oh,
a lot of it ends up in the house, right? It
right.
doesn't all go out the stack. And anyway, it's right there close by in the neighborhood. A lot of communities have no burn days for their wood stoves,
Okay.
especially when the air is pretty stagnant, where it
And
just
I was gonna say, does it matter like when the weather, like if it's hot, you don't want to burn, or if it's cold? I'm not sure which one it is.
right, right. Well, if it's hot, you don't burn because you don't need the heat. But
Oh, you got it. You have a very good point. Unless you're like me, who's constantly cold.
oh
Okay,
yeah,
got it.
right,
Got it.
right. When the wind speed is very low, it's when the air is pretty stagnant. That's pretty bad time because the wind dilutes it. It dilutes when
Yeah,
any
right. That didn't
emissions. We have this thing in environmental science called that we say is dilution is the solution to pollution. Yeah. So, if the wind is blowing, then okay, it dilutes it, it mixes it into cleaner air, and so the concentrations are lower, which means they're less harmful.
Which I will probably segue at some point into wind power, but let me get there. Let me get myself back on script, Dr. Wexler. What are some of the most critical findings from your research in air quality that could impact public health on a large scale? So, everything we do here in LA County is at a large scale. We're the ninth largest state in the union here in the county. What are you finding about this, the critical nature of our air quality? What do we need to be thinking about?
Hmm. Well, first, I want to give a shout out to the Air Quality Management District, which manages the air quality there, because they've done a fantastic job of improving the air quality.
AQMD, yes, indeed.
Yep. There's colleagues of mine all over the country and all over the world who work on the health impacts of air pollution. So we're looking at what concentrations of air pollution are low enough that they're safe.
I was going to
And
ask you that.
we keep finding significant health impacts at lower and lower concentrations, which is why the EPA keeps lowering the standards, because the EPA's mandate is to have pollutant standards that are low enough that they protect human health. That was how originally EPA was founded back in the 70s.
Should I assume that 2.5 is not low enough?
That's a good question. So a couple of years ago in the Biden administration, the PM 2.5 concentration was lowered from 12 microgram per meter cubed to 9 microgram per meter cubed because there was a lot of evidence that 12 was not safe enough, that concentration was too high and not protecting people's health. So it was lowered to 9. And we're finding some evidence that at 9, it's still not safe.
Okay.
And I think other people are too. But our results are relatively new, and they have to be backed up by other people doing similar experiments to make sure that we don't have some outlier result. And so I think the jury is out of whether we have to go lower than 9 or not.
Okay. I'm going to try not to politicize this, but do we still have an EPA?
You just politicized it.
I'm genuinely curious because who set they set the standards. They've been doing this since the 70s. So if they're not setting the standards, who would be?
They're the ones who do it. They still exist. I have colleagues who are still there working.
Okay.
I don't know how much longer that's going to last.
Let me talk about that. So that's at the federal level. But in California, we have some, as I understand it, we have some pretty stringent laws around environmental protection, which is different than the federal laws naturally. So, or will be different than the proposed federal laws. Do we need to do more here in California? And how do you envision what we're doing here in California opposed to what is proposed to be coming from the feds? I mean, how do we navigate those two differences?
Right. So California has its own EPA exception. It can institute regulation that is more strict than the federal regulation. And if California does that, other states can voluntarily adopt the California regulations instead of the US federal EPA regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And California regularly does that.
Mm-hmm. Like, is the leading state the leading charge?
California leads in a lot of ways nationally and internationally, and including in this area.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for instance, there's a mandate in California that in not too distant future, you will not be able to buy a new car in California unless it's electric.
That's right. I was going to bring that up in 2030. I think 2030, maybe it's 2035, because that impacts us. So as the second largest library in the country, we are leveraging our 86 locations currently right now to do two major things. Is to put EV chargers at half of our libraries with the ultimate goal of having all of our libraries have access to EV chargers. And we are standing up solar canopies in our parking lot so that we can refeed the grid. I'm so proud of this work that we do here in the county, this resiliency work. We have a whole office of sustainability and resiliency, and the leader is fabulous. But we understand where our state is headed, and so we're trying to support that. And I do believe, Dr. Wexler, that many other library systems are following suit in our 51 counties.
Yes, in Davis, we also have the parking lot shaded by solar, and that's that serves a lot of purposes. One is, of course, it's in the hot beating sun. Your car's not baking when you get into it. You don't burn yourself on the seat. There's a thing called the heat island effect where you get a higher temperature in these urban areas because of black asphalt and absorbing the sun and all that. By putting solar out there, you remove all that energy and make electricity out of it instead of making heat out of it. So not only are you shading and it feels cooler, but you actually are cooling, taking out that percentage of energy that is converted into electricity, and it's no longer heating the environment.
And feeding it back into the grid, or at minimum your own home. That kind of brings me to another question that I've had conversations with neighbors about the concrete. I think this is what you're referring to. Those of us who have older homes with a lot of concrete, that's supposedly bad for the environment. In my mind, I thought it would be good because I'm not watering as much, but it turns out it's polar opposite, right?
There's so many there's so many environmental trade-offs here, and it's very hard to navigate, one from the other. You're right. I mean, the concrete can get pretty hot. It can absorb, it can absorb more sunlight, and as you know, if you walk on it barefoot, you don't do that twice.
Never twice.
And of course, And grass is also not very sustainable because it uses a lot of water. There are other ground covers which use less water that are much more sustainable, use less water and use less resources. So yeah, these are all balancing acts, and difficult for me to say, oh, this is the right thing to do for everybody. It's not, it doesn't work that way.
My partner, Norma Garcia, who's the director of the Parks Department for the county, is constantly advocating for more tree canopies, right? So she's lost quite a few of them in the fires, which we'll likely get to in a moment.
Yep.
But she's always advocating to have more trees and have more canopy, to the point where they give them away annually. So I went and got myself two. So I'm growing these little tiny trees in the back of my yard, hoping one day to plant them, because it turns out, and you may correct me, we can plant trees on city-owned property, or maybe you wouldn't know because you're in Davis, but my understanding is we can do that. Have you heard of anything like that, as long as we tend to them so they don't die?
I am not aware of that. Yeah, I'm not
Someone
aware.
fact check me.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. I mean, here we have an organization called Tree Davis,
Okay.
which does that with the city's blessing and coordinated with the city.
Okay. To try to recreate the canopy.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
improve the canopy and everything that goes with that.
I see that as a huge benefit. And I also see it as, a lot of community engagement. As you know, with libraries, we're constantly figuring out ways to engage our communities. And if we had this sort of partnership of tree planting, I would be all for it. Okay, doctor, I'm getting back on script again. How do you approach the intersection of science, policy, and public health in your work? So this kind of bled into the policy work, trying not to politicize, but policy plays a big part of what you do. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do is there to support policy, right?
Okay.
What concentrations of air pollutants are causing health effects? What's happening in the atmosphere between the emission of the air pollutants and the concentrations that we're breathing? What are communities breathing that are living near factories or refineries or roadways that other people who are fortunate enough to live farther away from those sources, what are they breathing? And how should we put controls on those emissions so that those communities are not adversely affected? So we're doing all of these things here at UC Davis, and other UC campuses are doing these things too. It's all to inform policy, and where that policy is implemented at many levels. It's implemented at the air district level, so air quality management district, and there's many districts all over the state for different regions, different airsheds. It's also implemented at the state level, the California Resources Board, the Cal EPA, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. Those are all state agencies that all work to protect our health, and they need these studies in order to support regulation, in order to institute regulation that is going to protect our health and also be cost effective.
That's right. So as an academic, that's the work that you're doing. You're providing the research so that that informs the policy.
Right. We can't do policy. I mean, we can help government do policy, but we're not in the position to do policy ourselves.
I got two pieces of advice when I moved to Los Angeles from a colleague of mine who was part of regional planning. One thing he said is, like, don't live in the canyon because of fires. There's only one way in and one way out. The second piece of advice was, do your best, and I recognize what I'm about to say airs a level of privilege, but do your best to live at least a mile off of the highway. And I interpret that to mean what you're kind of alluding to here, because of all of the traffic constantly.
Yeah.
You want to kind of be off and away from that. Are those fair statements?
Yeah, the studies don't support a mile. The studies support a couple 100 feet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a mile is certainly safe, but it's also, I think, excessive. But certainly there are health effects that families that live close to busy roadways have more health effects of various kinds than families that live farther away.
That's right. I myself live in the flats, is what we call them, regular streets. Can you explain a little bit for our audience how air quality impacts human health? We all know that it does, but like beyond the respiratory issues, is there some other long-term effect that we should be aware of that many of us are not? I know I have a young child and I think about this often.
Yeah, it's a long list. So let's start with your child. One of the adverse health effects of breathing air pollution for children is that it changes their development. We know it changes lung development in that children who, for instance, are living close to busy roadways, but also exposed to air pollution in other ways, that their lung capacity is not as large, is diminished when they get to be adults. And I've published in that area, and a lot of colleagues of mine have done the same. That's a developmental issue. That's what we call it in science. That's because the body, the physiology of the body is developing, and because of exposure to air pollution, that development is altered. There's also evidence that there's higher rates of autism in families that are living close to busy roadways, which is a neurological development. It's disrupting the normal neurological development. And I'm sure there are other childhood health effects from air pollution that I don't know about, that I haven't studied.
I think those are plenty, frankly, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then for adults, there are many health effects from air pollution. Some of them we call acute, that is, they are short-term, and some of them chronic, that is, they're long-term. The short-term health effects so PM 2.5 is the primary killer of people in the US, the primary air pollution killer of people in the US, and it causes heart attack, which is why it's so severely regulated. And that happens pretty quickly. So when the air pollution, when the PM 2.5 concentration goes up, the statistics are that people are dying within a couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very fast. Yep. We don't know why, but the statistics are there, and studies have been all over the country and in other countries. Everybody gets basically the same results.
What you were going to mention a second one for adults?
Oh, there's plenty.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay. Wonderful. So one that affects children and adults is asthma.
That's right. I was going to mention that.
Yeah, asthma is rampant, and in some parts of California, it's ridiculously high, like 1 in 6 or 7 children in a classroom, say, might have asthma. So the poor teachers have to manage these in albuterol inhalers in addition to managing the kids. And so that is developmental, but it affects adults too. There's also increasing evidence that some of the neurological diseases that we're seeing have some relationship to environmental factors like air pollution. Alzheimer's disease, I already mentioned autism. Parkinson's disease is a very interesting one in that there is some evidence that air pollution can increase the incidence of Parkinson's, but smokers are protected. That if you smoke, you're less likely to get Parkinson's, which is kind of counter to
yeah.
So that's just super confusing.
That's the first positive thing I think I've ever heard about smoking in my entire life.
Well, I'm sorry for saying it. If I cause anybody to start smoking for that reason, then I messed up.
I don't think so. I think I think you're okay.
Yeah, so there's definitely brain effects. We expose rats to air pollution from vehicles, and we see particles in the brain. We see tiny little particles that make it from the lungs through the bloodstream into the brain. That's very disturbing.
I'm going to take a quick segue here, but not without a pivot. One of the things that we saw during these more recent wild and urban fires was obviously the pollution. I'm going to ask you a question about that. But one of the things we did at the library is we partnered with the Department of Public Health, and we stood up a myriad. I think we got 135 small air purifiers. So we set them up in each of our buildings, 5 to 10 of them in each building, because people coming in as leveraging the library for FEMA support and the Small Business Association, we had those at the library during the first few days of the fire. They were having some severe issues. So not only could they come in and, charge their phone, get some support, relax, but have clean air.
Yep.
So I want to say that. And then the other thing I want to say is about 6 months into the pandemic back in 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. I remember, doctor, walking outside of my house. I live in Los Angeles, and looking up, and I tell you, I have never seen such a blue, clear sky. Nobody was driving. We weren't driving. It was like, I think there was an LA Times article on how at that point in time we had completely done a 180 in terms of like pollutants here in Los Angeles. So I want to say that. Now, my question is, fire season is becoming more and more intense. In fact, it doesn't even feel like we have a season anymore, frankly. What are some of the best ways that families can protect themselves from poor air when there's a fire nearby? And what are some of the long-term strategies that you would like us to think about to ensure that there's good indoor air quality? Obviously, most of us have a singular purifier. Most of us have the MERV 2, I think they're called, filters for our air conditioner. What else can we do?
Well, so returning to the beginning of what you were talking about, so those MERV filters are very important for public buildings like libraries, but they should be using like MERV 14 or 16 or something pretty high number. And so then you don't need to have the ones that sit on the ground, because those are doing a pretty good job, those MERVs. Talk to your HVAC building maintenance folks to see if they can make that happen as much as possible. That will not only help with wildfires and with, other particles in the air, like from vehicles or whatever, but it will also help with spread of disease, right? Like COVID or measles.
Right.
A lot of these diseases are spread by us exhaling them and then someone else inhaling them.
So let me follow that comment backwards. So like, for instance, at your home, and I hear you about the business because you have a bunch of different kind of people coming in. So I will follow up to see which MERV filters we use in our libraries. But for our home, is there also a need to have that MERV 14 to 16, or do you?
So MERVs are not really for homes. If you have a recirculating air system in your home for heating and cooling, then you can get filters, get a good high quality filter at the hardware store and change that, frequently, every 6 months or every 3 months or whatever, depending on how much you use it and how bad the air is around where you are. And that should do it.
Yeah.
People usually run their air circulating system when it's either hot or cold, right? But in LA, which is where the weather is pretty mild, so during the fall and the spring, you don't run it very often. So that's a time when your air is not being cleaned by the air conditioning heating system in the house. But for many of them, you can turn the fan on without turning on.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Without turning on the heat or the cool.
Right.
Okay, and so that would then help clean up the air in the house. If you don't want to run the whole system for the house, that's fine. But you still want to have cleaner air, you can do what people do who don't have an air-based cooling heating system. You can get one of these things that sit on the ground, and there are many of these out there that have good filters in them to remove the particles from the air. And the really good ones also have activated carbon filters in them, so they get some of the gases out of the air that can also be harmful.
Okay. So a floor purifier or some sort of, if you have an HVAC system, some sort of filter. I said MERV 2 from my own recollection because I think my home ones are MERV something.
They could be. They could be.
Okay. I might be making a mistake, but either way, those are the two. I think I hear you saying those are the two biggest ways to try to support clean air in your home. Is there something else? I've always heard peace lilies, the plant peace lilies, which I have several. I have one right here. Supposedly clean air. I don't know if that's an urban legend. If it is, don't tell me that
I don't know. I don't know one way or the other. Anyway, it's always nice to have flowers in the house, so that's fine anyway.
Yeah, plant. Yeah, and so I think I actually see a question in the chat about plants, and
so the other things you can do to improve the air quality in your home is to emit less air quality into the home, right? So when you're cooking, turn the vent on. Now, not everybody has a vent, and even people who have vents, the vents don't necessarily go outside. Some of them go right back into the kitchen. So cooking, especially if you're frying food or doing something that emits a lot of stuff. As much as you can, ventilate the kitchen because it's a pretty big source of particles in the air.
Okay, so ventilation, air purifiers with the carbon component, if you can, and filters. I love it. Okay, let me ask you a couple more questions because I want to make sure I get to some of these questions in the chat. Some of them look really good. So, of course, these recent fires have stirred up quite a bit of concern about air pollution. I think we may be on the other side of it, but maybe not. How do wildfires impact air quality? I can tell you during the fires, I went outside naturally for several days. It was just gray. I lived right in between all of the fires. So it was gray in every direction. How does the wildfires impact air quality? Let's start there.
Wildfires affect air quality? I didn't know that.
I know it's craziness, crazy talk, right? But like your
Yeah,
point, like with the wind, does it dissipate and it's going to be ultimately okay in a day, or
yeah,
does it stick there and get into our lungs? Maybe that's a better way of asking the
right,
question.
right. Yeah.
I see you
Um,
razzing me, doctor.
so in LA, it's kind of a few days to turn over the air. You know, if you have a fire and then it stops, in a few days, it's pretty much cleared out. The LA wildfires were much worse than a conventional, whatever that is, wildfire, in that it was not just woody material. So in Northern California here, we've had a bunch of wildfires too, and most of them have been grass fires or brush fires or forest fires, and some of them, of course, houses too. But the percentage of smoke from the houses in the LA fires is much greater than from the woody material. So many houses burned, it's a terrible disaster. And those houses have plastics and metals and you name it. A lot of that stuff's pretty bad for your health.
And so that's what the county is doing right now. You know, nearly 100 days, almost a little over 100 days, like 120 days later, we're still cleaning up the debris and trying to make sure that people can enter those neighborhoods because of that plastic and all the stuff that you mentioned.
Yes. So the smoke is gone, but the ash is still there, and the ash is pretty toxic stuff too. When the workers are cleaning up the ash, they wet it down so it doesn't, so to minimize how much of it gets into the air.
Right.
And they are supposed to, and I hope they do, cover the trucks with a tarp or something so that when they're driving down the road to take it to wherever they're going, it doesn't blow around either or minimizes how much is blowing around. And then it ends up in a landfill where hopefully any kind of wind that might get it back up into the air again is minimized by covering it with something and keeping it wet until it's covered. And then when it's finally there, putting clay or something else over the top to keep it from getting back into the air again, where people would inhale it.
Okay. We have the Army Corps at several of our at least one of our libraries still collecting this debris from communities. Our Malibu library right now, so that's just another a good reminder to kind of see how they've operationalized the movement of that debris. What role has climate change played in the severity of the wildfires? I mean, I hear this on the news all the time. It has to do with climate change. Everything's about climate change. These fires. Do you believe that's a true statement, or do you believe the sort of other philosophical conversation about this is just sort of the ebb and flow of thousands of years? We haven't been around long enough to know that this is the way it goes. What's your thought on that?
Right. So the difficult part of this conversation is probability and risk. There's no way to say that an individual fire is due to climate change or any individual incident is due to climate change. But what you can say is we're getting a lot more wildfires than we used to get. And at the same time, the climate is changing, so it looks pretty suspicious, right? And a lot of scientific studies have borne that out.
Causation versus correlation. Yeah, okay.
Right. So correlation, yeah, it may not be causation, but there's lots of other studies that have closed that link and said it's not just a correlation, it is a causation. What you're seeing is, okay, there's always been wildfires in California. There's always been wildfires in LA, right?
Right.
but it's the frequency that's changing. How come we're getting these so much more often than we used to get them? And how come the wind speeds during those fires were completely off the charts?
Right.
There's always
Over
Santa
100 miles per hour.
Yeah, there's always been Santa Ana winds in LA. There's always been high
That's
wind
right.
speeds, but that high? If you want to be a climate denier, you can say, I don't believe it, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
In your opinion, what would you say is the most effective strategies communities and government should adopt to improve air quality and reduce pollution over time? Like we have some pretty stringent environmental rules and policies here in California, but what do you think we should be doing? And we'll start with California. Certainly you can, talk about the United States or the world, but let's start at home.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a question of you personally, what you can do personally, and what can the government do? What can the air quality management district do? Okay? You don't have a lot of leverage as a person. I mean, I think burning wood in your fireplace is probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Driving an electric car instead of driving a gas or diesel vehicle, great. Sign me up. Barbecuing in the backyard with charcoal, oof, please don't. Right?
Okay.
If you want to barbecue,
no, you're right.
if you want to barbecue, do a propane. Get a propane.
That's right.
That's
right.
And these kind of things, I think if you just think about the things that you do in your life, you know which ones, with a little thought, you know the things that are emitting air pollutants. When I teach air pollution classes here, one of the first things I ask the students is, why is the tailpipe in the back of the car? Why isn't it in the front of the car?
Because it would impact the person in the car.
Oh, how about that? Right? Well, how about the guy behind you?
Yeah, it's by design. No, yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so
out of sight, out of mind.
Right. Out of lungs in the mind.
It's interesting. I know that this is again off topic a little, but it's not. So I have heard an argument. So Los Angeles, we started about a year and a half ago allowing regular citizens to put their compost in the green bin. I was so happy about that because we've been trying to recycle the compost and been very unsuccessful. Now I hear that there's a conversation to stop that because of air quality, something to do with the compost letting off gas. Are you familiar with this conversation?
Sure.
It seems
Oh, yeah.
so counterintuitive. Can you enlighten us?
Sure, happy to. And I've worked on that problem here in our county. Me personally, we used to compost. If you compost by just piling it up, the problem is that you are promoting something called anaerobic digestion. Because what happens is that the top layers of the compost block oxygen from getting to the lower layers. And so that promotes bacteria that don't need oxygen. Okay? The problem is that those bacteria emit methane. So if you stir the compost, then you get the oxygen in there and you're not emitting methane. Great, okay? So now if you take it all to a facility, right, a landfill that's managing this, they can do it well or they can do it poorly. If they do it poorly, then they're just piling it up and they're therefore doing anaerobic digestion and emitting methane into the atmosphere, which is a terrible greenhouse gas. But what you can do is pile it up, and as you're piling it up, you put tubes in the pile and use those tubes to withdraw the methane out of the compost, and you can take it to a power plant to make electricity. You can burn it to make electricity. We do that here. I'm in Davis, California. We're in Yolo County, and the Yolo County landfill has a huge composting operation because we also have the green bins, and they do that. And there's actually a power plant right there at the compost facility that they take the methane out, they put it in the power plant, they run it to make electricity, and they sell electricity to utility. It eliminates the methane emission into the atmosphere, which is a greenhouse gas, but because you're making electricity with it, you're displacing making natural gas from fossil fuels.
That's right. That's right.
So it's a double win.
Brilliant. Doctor, I have to get to these other questions. This is the question I'm going to leave you with of mine, and then I'm going to ask a couple from the audience. What are you reading?
Oh, good one. I'm reading Nexus by Harari.
Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, Yuvali is, how do you say his name?
I don't know. I say Harari.
I've read Sapien, which I am fascinated by. I've even started it a second time in life, and that's a 3-part series. Okay, love it. So put that one on my list.
So that book, I have to tell you about 2 books. One is a depressing book and one is a fun book, okay? So Nexus is a depressing book. It's very important to read it. It really puts together a lot of ideas that are very interesting to think about in the current state of the world and the current state of the country. A book that I read just before that, which was hilarious, is called The Mezzanine, which was written in the 1980s by Barker. After I read it, I gave it to my wife, and she's like in bed cracking up, okay? And it's because it's about us. It's about the things that we do subconsciously or unconsciously, and he just gets it perfectly. It's incredibly insightful. One of my friends in LA, actually in Mount Washington, recommended this book. He said, in 100 years, people are going to read this book to understand our culture and how we behave.
That's right. I love it. I'm a huge nonfiction fan. I rarely read fiction. Just kind of, the nerd in me. So I love this. I got to ask at least 2 of these questions. Let me see. Here's one by Thomas. He says, I would love to hear opinions on bicycle trail expansion and other related infrastructure, new metro lines being completed. For example, Los Angeles County Metro Transportation Authority has been launching more campaigns to raise awareness and offer free rail and other incentives.
Yeah, sign me up.
Sign me up.
I used to bike from Los Feliz to Westwood on my recumbent bike, which I think I was one of the first people in Los Angeles to have a recumbent bike. And so, I'd be driving down Santa Monica Boulevard, and there'd be like a Ferrari and a Porsche and a Rolls Royce. And they didn't care about that. They were looking at my bike.
With their gas pipes, facing you as they pass by.
I wore a charcoal filter mask.
Oh, of course you did. Of course you did. Did you answer the question?
Well, I didn't really answer the question. So biking is great for exercise, and it's also great for, removing cars and other modes of transportation that would pollute. But you're also going to be breathing more air pollution. Because you're going to be, breathing harder. If you're going to bike, wear a mask. You can look at the air quality index and see what it's like. But if the air quality index isn't so wonderful, wear a mask.
It's always yellow.
Yeah, take transit instead of driving. Fantastic.
Does the green area near your house, for example, as Bonelli Park, could affect your health? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
There are linear parks near where I live, and people bike and walk and jog, whatever, on them, and that's great. I live in a cleaner place than LA too, so.
Yes, indeed you do. How safe is it to have solar panels on my home roof regarding radiation or any other kind of negative effects to our health? It's a great question.
I don't know of any negative effects of solar panels, on your house. They do contain, some of the panels contain.
On your health, on the house.
Yes, yeah,
okay.
On the health, the solar panels on your house will not, I don't know of any way it affects your health negatively. Okay, now disposing of them when their life has run out, that's a different story, because they do have some chemicals in them that are dangerous. And so that has to be done carefully, but that's not your problem, because you're not going to dispose of it in your backyard. It's going to be taken away to some facility, which will then hopefully extract those metals and use them.
That's right. Here's another question for you. I walk a lot outside, pretty dense area of LA. Is it worth it, the hassle I think I already know the answer, to wear an N95 mask to protect from air pollutant? What's the difference between an N95 and a KN95? I actually think I know the answer to that one. And should I stick to an N95? Is it worth thinking about?
Sure, the easy answer is, yeah, wear the mask because it's going to be better for you. But my concern is that people will subconsciously not exercise as much because of the burden of the mask and the discomfort of the mask. And so there's a trade-off here because exercise is good for you. I'm conflicted here.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And remember during the pandemic, you would see people with the mask, but not over their nose. There's also that I still see that one.
Yep.
But as I understand it, the KN95 is exactly the same as the N95. It's just the Korean standards versus the American standards. Is something like that?
I don't even know. I used to know this, but I forgot.
Well, that's on relatively good authority. I might be messing it up a little bit, but it's really just the protocols in which one country authorized the mask in the protocols of the United States. It's something like that.
Yeah.
I remember having to.
My favorite masks are the 3M Aura masks
Okay.
because they look kind of geeky, but they fit really well and they're pretty comfortable.
What are they called?
And
3M what? Aurora?
Aura, I think it's AURA, Aura,
Oh, okay.
and they have a lot of surface area. First of all, 3M is a company that has made filtration forever. I mean, that's one of their big things, and so they really know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got a lot of surface area, so it's really easy to breathe, right? It's easy to pull air through that material
Yeah.
because there's so much of it and it's designed so well. So when the masks I use mostly are those because those are just the most comfortable.
Well, our team has put the link in the chat, and she follows that up with, "This is not an ad." Dr. Wexler, it's been so great to interview you. Thank you so much for joining us. Even though it's a few days after Earth Day, we would love to have you back and keep this conversation going one day.
I would happy to do this again. This is fun.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Take care.